In the last video we looked at runology, the study of runes, and also looked at a bit of mythology. In this video we're going to take a brief look at the actual history of runes. According to historians, runes first appear around the 1st century AD, but it's unclear where they originally came from. It is believed, however, that conquering Germanic tribes may have adopted these letterings from more southern European peoples which they conquered, assimilating them into their own culture. Wherever runes originally came from, it's clear that the shape of runes developed for simple pragmatic reasons. First off, parchment and inks were expensive, and so less common outside of the Greco-Roman area of Europe, so runes had to be carved into objects. Secondly, straight lines are easier to carve into bones, rocks, trees, etc. than it is to carve curves. And then thirdly, runes usually don't have horizontal lines because that would go against the natural lines in wood and so would be very hard to do so. The famed Roman historian Tacitus, in his famous writings called Germania, which were written about the customs and lands of the barbaric Germanic peoples around 78 AD, mentions the use of runestones. Tacitus writes that runes were used as lots in augury or for divination, and believe it or not, this is a practice that would continue right until this day. In fact, throughout the history of runes, they would be used to tell the future, to perform magic, to curse or bless people and places. One Old Norse story tells of how a badly written rune cursed a farmer's daughter with sickness, and the hero has to come and destroy the runes by writing a blessing in their place. The earliest fully developed and most widely used runic script was known as Elder Futhark, a 24-character alphabet used between the 2nd century AD and 400 AD. Thanks to Roman conquests and the spread of Christianity, which at the time used Latin scriptures called the Vulgate, runes slowly began to die out, being replaced by Latin lettering. However, runes were not wiped out, and runes were still used during the Dark Ages, particularly among the pagan peoples of Northern Europe and Scandinavia. And somewhere during this period, Elder Futhark slowly underwent a reform. No one knows the reason why, but what is known is that 8 characters were removed, creating the alphabet that is known as Younger Futhark. The lifespan of this specific set of runes roughly corresponds to the Viking Age. Younger Futhark suffered the same fate though as the other runic scripts before it, being wiped out by the further expansion of Christianity into Germania and Scandinavia. By the 1100s, Christianity was beginning to replace the pagan religions of Scandinavia, and as the Bible was written and taught in Latin, so interest in the language and its letters slowly caused runes to decline in use. Despite this, instead of being replaced, the runes continued to be used for writing in the native Old Norse language. And once again, over time, they went through a reform, becoming what is known today as the medieval runes. The Latin alphabet, on the other hand, was mainly used by the clergy for writing in Latin and for teaching. But Latin prayers could and were often written down with runes as well. Because they were cheaper, runes stayed popular for a lot longer, but as inks became more common and cheaper, runes continued their decline. Now you'd think that would be the end of runes. Between inventions such as the printing press, inks becoming cheaper, church schooling, but somehow through all this, runes survived and actually were still used in Sweden until the early 20th century. The last alphabet of runes used were called Dalecarlian runes. These runes, as you could guess, come from a region in Sweden called Dacarnia. These runes had been created by mixing old runic scripts with Latin lettering. They were mostly used for decorations and calendars, etc. But it's still pretty cool to think that these runes could have been used within living memory, and that interest in them is still current. I know this was a very quick tour of runes in history, but hopefully you found it interesting and has made you want to look more into runes and runology, even just a little bit more. Please leave us a comment if you think there's anything that we might have missed that would have been important, and if any of you guys have seen runes in real life, then please leave a comment, as I'd love to read about that.